welcome. Today we are doing something in our napkin journal and we are going vintage. And I was inspired by this beautiful napkin from Ninny's Napkins. It definitely reads vintage, this soft pink with the very neutral background and that green, and I'm going to take the colors and the feeling from this. I'm cutting out this area. I'm thinking I might use that on another page or project. Now what we need to do is take off the 2 excess plies of white, and I just use a piece of masking tape to get those edges, but make sure you get the 2. And now I'm going to water cut this rose. And I'm using a liner brush, script liner brush, with just water. And I'm cutting around it, going in sections, little by little. Now, when I first do it, I'm not going and doing all the intricate parts. I will come back and do that later. Right now, I'm taking the bigger parts off. And I find that it's best to do this just little by little. You don't want too much water, and it works best if it's on a glass surface or a non-porous surface. If I put this on paper, the water soaks through the paper underneath the napkin. So that's why I can't get rid of the glare for you. So I'm just going around. Flowers are great. If the napkin's a flower, it's great because it's very forgiving. Now, I was thinking I was going to put it on this 6x6 card or do it on a card. I end up going into my art journal, but you can mix and match. I decided to use 2 roses, so I end up cutting 2 roses here. What you're seeing here is me cutting the finer points and just using the end of the brush to get that out. But if I was doing just one, this would make a nice card, and I can do all the same steps on a card, on a 6x6 canvas. Because I'm going with my 7x10 art journal, I'm going to do 2 roses because you want the weight of the focal image to match, the size of the substrate that you are using. So now I am playing with these 2 roses, and I know that I'm going to cut out some of this and basically make my own composition. So I'm just cutting off some of these little ones so it doesn't look like it's the same image that I've glued down twice, if that makes sense. Then I'm playing with, okay, where can I put these buds to make it my own? This rose really reminds me of the old-fashioned rose that grew, in my grandparents' homestead. So I'm going to build my focal image on the left-hand side of this page. And, there is really no shortcut. If you're unsure how to utilize a napkin, you really have to water cut the elements out and then do what I'm doing right here. Play with it, move it around, and see what kind of composition you can do. Sometimes what you have in your head when the napkin's all together works out, and sometimes it doesn't. So I'm just going to tape off the coiled edge. That'll give me a straight edge. And this is from a coiled scrapbook or art journal, but I will be putting it back together on the coils when it's all done. Now, because I'm going vintage, I want to use some of this pattern paper, but instead of just going with the color, I thought I'm just going to do some stamping. Some of my letter stamps, things that I would otherwise just stamp on there, I'm just going to put it onto this golden pattern paper. I really like how this pattern paper collages on, the texture that it gives. So I'm just going to add the pattern here, and that's going to allow me to rip it up and put it where I want to. and using the pattern painter gives that paper gives that vintage vibe. So all these stamps are from Stamperia. They are also from Ninny's Napkins, and I will put a link to her store in the description box below, and there is a coupon code if you are interested. When you stamp like this, you can double up stamps, layer them. And what I don't use in this project will go in my stash and it'll be ready for me to use for another project. So I like the ripped edges, so I'm just going to rip parts of this. So you can see, if I was using the stamp, it would be really hard to get that area. Because I've stamped on the paper, now I can rip and select what parts of the stamp I want and go from there. I've set my focal image there just to give me an idea of where it is. I've also got some vintage printables. If you do a search in Pinterest, you can find some vintage printables. I've got old book paper that I bought at a thrift store. You can see that lovely color. So a lot of the color and pattern that I'm going to put on here is actually on these vintage papers, be they the ones that I've created, faux vintage, or the pages that I got from the thrift store. I'm gluing everything down with my fluid matte medium from Liquitex. So if you don't have a lot of stamps, using free printables like this are a way of getting those script stamped and different images on here without having the stamp. So this is another vintage printable that I have, and I like the large size font that's there. I also like that it's another color in the neutral to put on here. This one has more of a gray tone. And I'm just layering it up. And again, I'm gluing it down with my fluid matte medium. I want to add texture, so I'm using TCW Light and Fluffy modeling paste through this. I believe this is called stained glass stencil. Now, my Light and Fluffy modeling paste is fairly old, and so it's a little bit drier, but actually it goes on really, really well. And I don't want it so perfect, so I'm just kind of rubbing off some of it. So if it's imperfect, if you get it where you don't want it, or you just want to alter it, you can scrape it off. I'm using a key card to apply it. I find that's my most successful. And I'm putting it on 3 places on my substrate. And I'm just going to scrape back some of it, make it less perfect. I'm going vintage. I don't want it so precise and pristine. So once that's dry, I'm going to cut off all that excess so I get a good look of what my page is looking like, making sure that all those collage items are actually glued down properly. And now I want to get to putting my focal image. Now when you glue down the napkin, what's behind it will show through because the napkin goes very translucent. So I've got some rather dark stuff under there. So what I'm going to do is use some gesso and paint that out. Knock it back so that I don't it doesn't darken or dull my focal image. I'm just giving a quick watered down overall gesso to my page. So I'm knocking back some of that print. It's not going to be forward. It's going to allow my focal image to be the star of the show. But that other patterning and stamping and mark making is still going to peek through. Now I'm using watered down unbleached titanium, and that is the perfect color for vintage. You can add a little gray, makes it a lovely grayish color. But here I just use the unbleached titanium, and then I'm wiping back some areas where I want more of those printables to show through. But you can see I'm still getting the patterning and the feel from all those printables and the collaging I did in those beginning layers. Adding a little bit more gesso to just knock it back a little bit more. I just don't want to lighten those or darken the roses too much. I want that to show. I'm not too worried about where the leaves are, so it's mainly where the flower is going to go. And then I'm gluing it down with my fluid matte medium. Now be careful, because when the napkin gets wet, it becomes very fragile and rips easily. More so if you have texture modeling paste underneath. I am being rather careful, but this part of the video I've sped up, so it looks like I'm going very quickly. In reality, I'm not. So we have a very soft. Now I'm going to add some of those buds back in to make this my composition. And I'm liking how I have that modeling paste in the top right-hand corner and the top left-hand corner. The one on the bottom you don't see so much because the image is there, but it does peek through. So once that's dry, I want to add color to my napkin. Now this has become a non-porous surface because it has been completely covered with fluid matte medium. And I'm just rubbing on my Inktense pencil block and applying color. And I sometimes grab a little bit of white gesso, and I'm using, I think I use 3 different colors of pink. And as you can see on the far left, I've got them swatched out, so I'm matching it to, as best I can, to the colors in the napkin. I'm not being precise here. I'm going fairly abstract. I'm adding a little bit of gesso. I am also. Then I take some of the Inktense block and I wet it. I was going to smoosh, but it wasn't moving as well. I didn't get it as wet. So then I just decided to paint it on, keep it very wet, and I'm rubbing that into the background. I want a little bit of that color that's in those roses to show up in the background, very subtly. And when I put some color on where the modeling paste was, it's getting caught in those nooks and crannies and giving me, making that texture show. Then I'm looking for the green, and I'm going to add some of the green to the background. I believe this is olive green. Now, Inktense pencils and blocks are intense color, but they are ink. And once they're activated, they are permanent, which means if I put wet layer on top of this, it's not going to smudge. So here I'm getting the color from the Inktense pencil, and I'm splattering. I want to bring that color that's in the rose to the background, and then I'm going to do the same with the green. I'm just adding water, getting a puddle, and then I'm splattering. This just adds to the vintage feel. Now I have my General's charcoal. This is the medium one, and I am holding it loosely and just basically sketching around. This is very loose and very imprecise, and adds to, in my mind, the vintage feel. I'm not trying to outline everything. I'm in some cases I'm making my own lines, not even following what was there originally with the napkin. I'm adding in some of the definition of the petals that got lost when I added color. Then I'm taking the soft charcoal, General's charcoal pencil, and smudging it around the edge. And I'm doing this instead of my usual shading because it gives more of a vintage feel. And I'm doing it now as opposed to earlier on because I know I'm done adding any fluid mediums to this, any liquid that will reactivate, because the charcoal will reactivate. Then I'm just kind of sketching around some of my texture paste here, my modeling paste, just to make it stand out just that little bit more and add to the overall vintage feel. You want it to look smudged and imperfect. So I'm going to my sentiment binder, and I'm in my Grateful, Thankful, Blessed sentiment pack, and I see this one, so very thankful, incredibly grateful, unbelievably blessed. And my plan was to use one. As you can see, I end up using 3. When I started playing with it, it just seemed to work better with the composition that I have. And remember, when you buy those digital sentiment packs, be they mine or somebody else, you can resize them to fit whatever project you're doing. So you can see all the elements that I've used still show through. So I'm happy with how everything looks. I've made my final decisions. I'm going to glue down my sentiments, again with my fluid matte medium. You can use gel medium the same. I would continue using a matte finish because I don't like the shine. And many people ask, do you varnish your pages? Do you seal them? No. In my art journal, I typically don't seal them or varnish them. If I had done this on a canvas, I would use Minwax polyacrylic varnish. And then I do get usually a shine or satin finish. Splattering with some gold. And taking off the coil or off the tape. And I grab my Posca pen and I'm just outlining parts of the sentiment. Close-ups of the finished pictures page are at the end of the video. If you have a question, leave it in the comment section below. Give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already a subscriber. And until next time, go get creative.